The prosecution actually asked me, Mr. Deaton, during your time in law enforcement, did you ever hear about the 21-foot rule? And so that's where we start. And I was like, yes, I have. And why don't you tell this jury about what is the 21-foot rule? And that's when I realized, I'm going to talk about this.
Welcome to Hey Chaplain. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. The Hey Chaplain podcast is about talking to police officers who say, "Hey Chaplain, I've got a story to tell and some hard-earned wisdom to share." The guests on Hey Chaplain come from across the world, from the LAPD to Scotland Yard, from Thailand to Texas. They are sharing their wisdom so that you don't have to learn everything the hard way. And as a patrol chaplain, I think you deserve something positive and encouraging. You will also notice that there are no commercials or advertisers. There's no sponsors interrupting the show. But that also means that there's no advertising budget. And so don't be selfish, but share the Hey Chaplain podcast with anyone and everyone you think might be interested. This show only grows because of word of mouth. Imagine that someone with a knife or another deadly weapon is charging at you with intent to kill. How close do they have to be for you to deploy deadly force? Did you say 21 feet? Well, that's what I've always been told. But what if you take that shot and now you're on trial for murder and the prosecutor has evidence that says the assailant was 22 feet away when you took your shot? Oh no. Our guest today is Doug Deaton, and hopefully your lawyer will hire someone like Doug, a veteran cop and an expert on use of force issues, to give testimony as an expert witness in court. Doug has done exactly that, and I brought him in today to tell the story of when a lawyer let him explain the 21-foot rule to a jury. Here's Doug Deaton. Hello, Doug. How are you today?
I'm doing great. It's nice to be here.
I'm glad to have you on the show. Can you tell me just a little bit about what you've done in law enforcement?
I worked at the Plano Police Department in Plano, Texas. That wasn't my first agency, but it was the second one that I worked at. I was a police officer for about 26 years in the Dallas Metroplex area. So the city that I worked for was about 72 square miles, 300,000 people, geographically at the top of a location that was about 7 million people total. So it's just one gigantic city. Mm-hmm. So I started out there as a patrol officer. I was on SWAT for a number of years, was a training sergeant, and later worked in criminal investigations, promoted to lieutenant, which I just never thought would happen. Then finished my career in crimes against persons. So I was the lieutenant over all investigations of everything from simple assaults to kidnappings, homicides, family violence, sex crimes, things of that nature. And I retired from law enforcement in 2021.
Okay, when you think back on your career, were you more the detective, the investigator, or were you more the door kicker?
I was definitely more the door kicker. I was a gun guy, a firearms guy, a SWAT guy. I was on the SWAT team for about 9 years, a little shy of 9 years. And even after promoting into the role of lieutenant, I was called back in to be a tactical operations commander, barricaded persons, things of that nature. I had to do a lot of oversight on applications for use of the SWAT team. So I'm kind of a weird dude because most people typically do pick one lane or the other, and then they kind of stick with it. And I was definitely the gun and SWAT guy and the jiu-jitsu guy, and then I transitioned over into criminal investigations, especially during the latter half of my career. Ultimately, though, that has worked out really well for me in the private sector.
Do you remember the first time you had to testify in court?
Yes, I do. I think the very first time I testified was on just a very simple, plain vanilla traffic citation that was being contested. But it felt very real to me. It was it was a little intimidating. You got a judge in the robe there and lawyers present and a jury and all of that over a traffic ticket.
On that day, did you think, man, I want to come back and be in court more? Did you think that at the time?
Absolutely not. It was very, very uncomfortable. No, I did not like it at first.
So tell me how it turns out now, all these years later, that you deliberately put yourself in the position to testify in court.
I do. That's what's funny is, and it's kind of like public speaking. They say that people are terrified of public speaking, and there's probably some truth to that. But the more you do it, the better you get at it. Once you sort of lean into the challenge, lean into the fight a little bit, it becomes sort of like a chess game, and you start to figure out where you can perform better. Having a difficult opponent makes you sharper. It makes you more professional, and I began to enjoy that very much, actually. I sort of enjoyed the intellectual back and forth within the confines of the courtroom, and of course the rules of evidence and rules of testifying. I guess I'm starting to become somewhat well known for my writing and my analysis of situations and incidents. The fancy term being post-incident analyses, and so it's actually very satisfying to be able to determine what actually occurred, or to be able to testify in plain language that everyday people can understand and break down very difficult concepts or esoteric sounding concepts for the everyman, for the every woman, and just explain to them, hey, they're using these terms, but that's really just a fancy way to say 1 + 1 = 2. And I really do enjoy doing that.
Yeah. And this is important for a jury trial, for instance, but really any situation where the lawyers and the judges involved just don't have a clear understanding maybe of some of the things that law enforcement officers experience. And if you have the ability to articulate that and put that into terms that somebody outside of the law enforcement field can understand and put their mind around, that's a useful skill. And so you've been brought in to give expert testimony in some cases, right?
I have, yes, sir. I've testified on behalf of police officers, sheriff's deputies, in use of force trials several times now. I've testified many times in the state of Texas, but also in Virginia, Oregon, and Washington.
Yeah. And now you were telling me, too, that you had the opportunity recently. You were testifying, and you got the opportunity to speak to something that has kind of been bothering you for a little bit, and maybe bring some clarity to that situation. Can you tell me that story? So you're in court testifying. What kind of a case was it?
This was a murder trial in Texas. This involved a citizen self-defense shooting, and there were really primarily two people involved. You have your citizen defender with a handgun blocking the doorway of his home to prevent the other party from entering his home. The other party had a metal pump in his hand. It sort of resembled a bicycle pump, and they were erroneously referring to it as a bicycle air pump, but that's not really what it was. It's something known as like a liquid transfer pump. So it's a somewhat heavy metal object, and it has what's known as a barbed hose fitting at the end, where you have to slip the hose on there. And so this guy was holding it like a club with the sharp barbed hose fitting exposed, and was telling this other person that he was going to kill him with it, and then raised it up and was approaching him. And then so there was a shooting, and consistent with many shootings, one of the bullets actually hit the weapon itself. It hit the pump that he was holding in his hand. We see that a lot in both officer-involved shootings and citizen self-defense shootings. It's very common for people to be shot in the hand or in the weapon or object that is being held at that time. And so one of the things that came up in the trial when I was trying to explain the dynamics of movement and interpersonal violence and time, distance, cover, or the lack thereof, was this notion of the quote-unquote 21-foot rule. And I tell you what, if I had $1 for every time I've heard people on the internet and even criminal defense attorneys and seasoned prosecutors both use the phrase 21-foot rule, man, I'd be wealthy. I wouldn't be doing anything anymore.
I can hear in your voice that it's specifically the word rule is grating on you. But tell me, what do they mean by that? So let's just start there. What do they mean by a 21-foot rule when this gets brought up as if it's common knowledge?
Most people who use that phrase are laboring under the false belief that if a person with a knife or an object that can be used to inflict serious bodily injury or death is at or inside 21 feet, that you can automatically shoot them. that they're automatically a deadly threat. And so that if you can envision a radius or a distance around you that's this bright line standard of 21 feet, once your would-be opponent gets to that 21-foot space and then takes a step over that imaginary 21-foot line, he's bought and paid for.
Okay. Outside 21 feet, he's safe. Inside, he's a goner. All right.
20
okay.
feet, it's a no-go, right? 20 feet, it's weapons free. You're like, no, that is not correct, first off.
Okay, so how did this come up in that trial?
Surprisingly, it was the prosecution that brought it up. And because initially the attacker had been far further than 21 feet away and was approaching the doorway with this weapon in his hand. And so as best I can tell, they were trying to make the claim that because he was beyond 21 feet initially, that the defender really should not have pointed his weapon at him at all. And then there was a question about exactly who was standing where at the moment that the citizen began firing. Was he standing immediately at the door? Was he 10 feet away from it? We can't tell because of where the shell casings are. And so they were, I think they were trying to make the case, well, no, he was 30 feet away, so he wasn't a deadly threat. And that turned out to not be true either, because the attacker in this particular case was a young, very physically fit, athletic male with a significant methamphetamine habit. And so a person meeting that criteria can easily cover 30 feet or more in a very, very short amount of time.
Sure. So the prosecution brings it up potentially to say that it was outside that distance, therefore it was not necessary. And you get brought up on the stand. So it's being brought up to you while you're testifying, or is this?
That's correct. The prosecution actually asked me, Mr. Deaton, during your time in law enforcement, did you ever hear about the 21-foot rule? And so that's where we start. And I was like, yes, I have. And why don't you tell this jury about what is the 21-foot rule? And that's when I realized, I'm going to talk about this. So they actually let me talk for quite a while. And I started off by explaining, I think it's important that we understand it's not a rule. And then I went into the history of this. You can call it a concept. You can call it a drill. There's several other terms for it. But I was able to speak about, Dennis Tueller with Salt Lake City Police Department, who was one of the first guys that worked on this. And it was originally an article in SWAT magazine, about how close is too close. And that was...
Do you know about when that was?
That was circa 1985, I believe.
Okay, so in the 80s.
Yes.
In the 80s, they're talking about this. Okay.
That's right. And Dennis Tueller was a firearms instructor with Salt Lake City PD. And there's been some other videos where he talks about it as well, and some other articles on this. But he's even tried to make sure people understand this is not a hard and fast rule. All they were doing initially was trying to determine about how much distance could an average person cover in 1.5 seconds. And the key to that is the average person. And when you think about, an outside the waistband holster, a duty holster especially, about how long does it take a police officer to draw that pistol and address a deadly threat that's approaching? And so, opinions vary, but even if you go with 1.5 seconds, how much distance could an attacker cover in that 1.5 seconds? And what he found, and what has been repeatedly found, is that the average person can cover roughly 21 feet. That's all. It's a concept, it's a drill. It's something to keep in your back pocket and to keep in mind when time and distance are both shrinking.
So you get the latitude to talk about this. I would think that a lawyer's instinct would kick in and say, wait a second, this isn't helping me. Was there any point at which they cut you off?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So when you're testifying as an expert, typically what happens is you have the initial examination part. So whoever's hired you as an expert or retained you as an expert, they talk to you first. And then the other side gets to cross-examine you. And so that came up a little bit, just a touch with the defense attorney, but it really came up with the prosecution. And you could tell he probably thought he was going to really get me there. And then when it wasn't going that direction, it wasn't very helpful. What I did think was funny was that then he started talking about, well, what about the length of the arm and then the length of the tool that he's holding? And so if he's not actually at that distance, well, then he's actually not a deadly threat. And I was like, well, it's an imminent deadly threat if he's rapidly approaching. If someone is charging you with a piece of metal in their hand, yes, that is, especially when they've just told you they're going to kill you. That is absolutely an imminent deadly threat. So I was able to talk about that at length. Quite a few questions. Frankly, we covered several different scenarios from 30 feet away to 21 feet to 6 feet to contact distance.
So I've had officers who have been in the situation that citizen was in, where they've had to make a decision to shoot a suspect that was closing on them. And when that happens, this concept, this 21-foot rule gets brought up. Sometimes in defense, like, hey, you don't realize how fast someone can close on you. It was absolutely justifiable to use deadly force. And then other times, I think what this prosecutor was trying to do, they're like, well, they could have used something else. They had time because, they were 30 feet away or 25 feet away. Therefore, they could have used option B. How would you respond to an officer who is sweating it out, not sure, am I in trouble? Am I going to go to jail? Am I going to lose my career? What would you say to that officer?
So I would say that everywhere you go, you need to be surveying the land around you, looking for objects and vehicles, things that you can put between you and a potential attacker. Just something as simple as a couch. I'm speaking on that from personal experience. It's not necessarily going to solve anything, but it gives you some additional delay. And it also, when you put an object between you and that attacker, it also, in many cases, even when they can get over the top of that object, it also provides that third party reviewer with an actual bright line to look at. Like, hey, this guy was holding a butcher knife. He just pulled it out of the block there. He was standing in the kitchen. There was nothing between he and I. So I moved over so that the couch was now between him and me. And he still came at me, and he was coming over the top of that couch when I finally shot him. So it's not some imaginary distance. It's not some imaginary object or line on the ground. It's a hard, serious object. You have a couch there. You have a Ford F-150 between you and him. If at all possible, don't just stand there and let the bull charge you, and hit you with both horns. Try to put something between you and him if you can. And then what we've seen in a lot of training is, of course, getting off the X or moving offline. Backpedaling is almost never the answer. You're so much better off with some quick side steps, and then looking to create not just distance but alternate angles. Humans being bipedal animals, we're great at charging in straight lines. We're not great at maneuvering rapidly after we already have all that momentum moving forward. So if you can just step offline a few feet, sometimes that'll give you a little bit more time to make a decision.
I was going to ask you about training, and you said that Tueller was developing this concept 40 years ago. Do you feel like training has adequately absorbed this idea of an attacker closing on you? And if not, then what would you tweak, or what do you like to see in training to address a closing attacker?
I think that it has in many respects. I think training has gotten much better and does address it. But I do also sometimes think that in some agencies or jurisdictions, they don't do a true deep dive into the original purpose of that study and the ongoing studies that have been done on movement. I think that the Force Science Institute has done some phenomenal work there, and those papers and studies are available for free, especially for police officers to look at. There's been some great work on that. I do wish that more training units and training officers would really take a hard look at that, because it is really about time, distance, cover, and the amount of time that it takes a human being to see a threat, figure out what it is. So they have this cognition. They use a word. People like to use the word cognition. That's just a fancy word for thinking, right? figuring it out. Like, hey, that's not a ham sandwich in his hand. That is, in fact, a butcher knife, and he's coming right at me. So now we have to make a decision. Well, by the time we've made a decision, a great deal of time has actually elapsed already, and the distance between us and that attacker is shrinking. In some cases, exponentially shrinking, because he is accelerating as he's running at you. That's a long-winded answer to your question. I think we've done a great job in law enforcement. I think there's probably in some corners, there's probably still some good work to be done. We really need to look at, again, that perception, cognition, and motor movement process, because that's really where the rubber meets the road. And one of the examples that I like to use when I'm trying to explain this to laypersons is that anyone who's ever been to a driver's education course, anybody who's ever had the proverbial ball roll out into the roadway and a child comes running after it, or some kid on a bicycle pulls in front, inadvertently pulls in front of your car. Anybody who's ever experienced those things inherently understands the perception, cognition, and motor process. They get it. They realize, oh, I see now. When you talk about, hey, when you're going down the highway and suddenly the car in front of you just locks up their brakes, and now you have to realize, oh, that's their brake lights coming on. Oh, there's no distance, and you're stomping on your brakes as hard as you can, and there's just a few molecules between your front bumper and their rear bumper. That'll help people understand a little bit the kind of fear and panic that you, the police officer, was experiencing at the moment this person was running at you, with a weapon of some kind, whether it was a knife or, a hammer or some other object, just a piece of rebar. It could be anything.
I'd actually like to hear your thoughts on when the object in the hand is misinterpreted, because sometimes officers take lethal action against a charging suspect who is not holding a knife. It turns out they were holding a phone.
Correct. Yes. And so these are those mistakes, a mistake of fact, a mistake of perception. A great class that I went to one time was talking about, we often think about things in terms of snapshots, but in reality, we need to be trying to force our brains to operate more like a video camera. It doesn't, but try to do that. Try to have that movie in your mind. Again, it's also about surveying what's going on around you and with that person, and conducting a meaningful analysis of what you're seeing as much as possible. Look, whole body down to the hands, waistline, and demeanor. Yeah. Because sometimes those people are intentionally trying to get you to shoot them, or they're intentionally trying to get you to make a mistake. And so they will hold an object that is really not able to be implemented as a deadly weapon, either because they're suicidal or they have mental issues or what have you.
Yeah. And you're moving more from the 21-foot rule to, I guess Graham v. Connor, right?
Yes, right. Objectively reasonable. Correct. Right. Okay. And if we expect zero defects, we're never going to get that because human beings are involved here. Any organization which employs human beings will always have some kind of flawed decision making that occurs, no matter what our intentions were. Using proper illumination, a proper flashlight in your hand, not on a weapon mounted light, but I'm not speaking against weapon mounted lights at all, but having that flashlight in your hand early and often, illuminate those hands that you see that are out there. Be aware of the hands you cannot see. And I continue to recommend to people, man, I'm a huge believer in sidestepping. I am. And I don't mean when you're drawing your pistol. I'm just talking about, hey, somebody says, hey, hold on just a second. Let me go in. I'll get my ID. Hey, no problem. And you're on the left side of the door. As soon as they turn their back, I sidestep a few steps over. So when they come out again, they're expecting to see me there on that left side of the door, but I'm over here on the right side of the door now. Yeah. That's something just that simple. I've seen videos where that has saved officers' lives. You need to be constantly able to be moving and reading that scenario, reading that person, again, their whole body and their demeanor, and really take a good look at what you can see in those hands. If you're not sure, illuminate that quickly. And that's movement is life. Stillness is death.
So tell me how that day on the stand ended. It started to turn for that prosecutor. How did that finish?
So we ended up, he did a great job. He did the best that he could. He wasn't necessarily hostile, but of course, he has to represent his client, which is the state. He tried to hit me with several different scenarios in which it would not have been, in these hypothetical scenarios, it would not have been, righteous to shoot the attacker. And I was able to explain how the object that he was holding was effectively the same size, weight, and length as a police officer's standard issue ASP baton. Mm-hmm. And, but except this also had the ability to puncture somebody's eyeball or their skull or, that soft area or their face or what have you. And that I was able to explain that no reasonable person would charge a homeowner who's holding a gun, telling them to stay away. That alone was an indicator of this guy being an unreasonable person and unhinged and dangerous. Ultimately, I was able to overcome, all of his scenarios right up until the part where, because a piece of the hose was still attached to the other side of the thing. And I was explaining to him, look, I've seen people strangled with cordage, ropes, and water hoses. So yeah, he could have absolutely strangled the homeowner to death. You're doing well when the jury is looking at you and nodding their heads along with you. So I bet he couldn't wait to get you off the stand. Yeah, that was it. To be honest, I was expecting a lot more pushback, and because sometimes it's very ugly, very contentious, but it really wasn't in this case. He did the best he could. It just didn't come up, didn't work for him because, in my opinion, this guy he really did have no other choice but to use deadly force. And ultimately, the jury came to that same decision. The next day, they acquitted him. I don't know if you specifically work for certain lawyers or that kind of thing, or if you would ever have that prosecutor come back and say, you know what, I've got a case where I could use this guy as an expert. It's possible. The legal world is a small world. Texas is a big state, but I keep running into some of the same guys. I even run into people that I used to work with who are working at DA's offices or they're working for other agencies elsewhere. It's funny you say that. I worked on a case down in Houston, and that was a pretty good contentious deposition on a shooting issue. And when we were done, the attorney who had hired me told me, he was like, "Hey, I promise you, those guys are going to hire you in the future." He said, "When it happens, just call me to tell me, hey, you were right. They called me and they wanted to hire you." So it hasn't happened yet, but you never know. All right. Final question. Do you have any advice if there's an officer who they've been in the courtroom before, they feel like they have the aptitude and the ability to explain these things and have a passion to explain it? If you're looking to be an expert witness, any advice to somebody who's going to dip their toe in that water? Yes. Whatever you choose to be an expert in, become a true student of that craft. Whether you are a accident reconstructionist, whether you're a shooting scene reconstructionist, whether you're into firearms, whether you're going to be an expert in interviews and interrogation, there are many different lanes for experts to work in. And I'm specifically talking about police officers. It's not good enough to go to one or two classes and then just do it for a few years. That's not going to cut it. You have to read the material, go to training, take notes, become a true student of this craft. And I mean that in all sincerity. You really do have to do a deep dive into whatever that craft is, whatever that field of your expertise is. And it's not just something that you choose. It's something that, in a way, kind of chooses you. It is. Yeah, exactly. Because, and I'm glad you said that. There's so many people out there that claim to be experts, and maybe they even get a couple of courts to say they are an expert, but then you find out they never actually done it. Mm-hmm. So they've gone to all these classes or schools, or this guy has a PhD in criminology, and he went and wrote out a few times with these different agencies, and he wrote some articles in a police magazine, and people will call that guy an expert. But people like that often fold on the stand because they don't have any practical hands-on experience in this field. I don't know anything about traffic crash reconstruction at all. I know that it's very detailed and very difficult, and a lot of math is involved. But if somebody went out and went to those classes and they got those certifications, but then I found out they have never been on the scene of a fatality traffic crash. well, then that tells me they're not actually an expert. They're a guy that's been to some classes and maybe got some certifications, but he's never actually been a practitioner. And I think that's the big difference. There's so many cops out there that have a tremendous amount of experience, real world hands-on experience. Back yourself up with some extra training and start saving documents and files now so that you can use them in your repertoire later.
That's excellent. Doug, I thank you for doing what you're doing. I appreciate your service all those years in Texas, and I appreciate what you're doing now to continue to help the cause of justice. Very much appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Thank you. I want to thank Doug Deaton for being here today. I am friends with Doug on social media, and as soon as I saw him write about testifying in this particular case about the 21-foot rule, I said, that is an episode. When complex subjects are dumbed down, they can be misused. So having someone like Doug who can explain a complex subject and yet still maintain its nuances is really valuable. It's a skill that a lot of cops have, and I hope that some of the people listening to this episode are going to be inspired to take that same skill and use it in the way that Doug does as an expert witness. The views expressed here are the personal views of the hosts and our guests and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you like this episode, please share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain, and as always, let's pray for peace in our cities.